All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. It's very exciting to kick off our first meetup of 2021, and we welcome everyone, and we're very happy to see you here. Drupal Toronto was founded in 2006, and to the best of our knowledge, is the third oldest Drupal meetup in existence. So we are very happy to reconnect with our regulars, our friends that we've been part of the community for a very long time, and we're also very excited to welcome a whole bunch of new people are attending today. So we're really excited to see that. So welcome, whether you're in Toronto or from afar. Drupal Toronto is governed by a code of conduct. So Drupal Toronto is dedicated and committed to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion. So we expect everyone at our events to adhere to these guidelines, in person or virtual. And if anyone ever faces a challenge related to these issues, if you could please reach out to myself, Aidan, or Pierre, one of the other organizers, we will work to help resolve that issue with you. I also want to shout out to the volunteers who help make Drupal Toronto happen. Victoria Campbell is on my team at Foster Interactive, Joanne Crone with Daedalus Interactive, Blake Robson from Pantheon, and Pierre Marcel. These are the folks that really keep the wheels turning on these events, help organize, help promote, are helping manage the events right now. And so I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who helps out, because it would not be possible to do this without them. Also wanted to point out that we have a survey to help and improve our event as time goes on. So we'll send out the link to the survey at the end. And it's also really, really helpful for the presenters if you can provide some feedback on their survey, and for us as organizers to see what you like and maybe what you don't like, so we can continually improve the events. So today the agenda is really, we're going to do a welcome and an icebreaker session that should take us to 10 after. Then we're going to have our presentation, and then afterwards we'll do question and answer. And then at the end, we'll wrap up at 1 and again, post out that survey link. So a couple announcements. DrupalCon North America, which is an online only event, is April 12th to 16th. I did a quick peek. It looks like tickets are $245 USD to attend. So that's really cool. So I encourage everyone to sign up and participate. Another really interesting update that's been happening is the Oliviero theme is sort of made it into the Drupal experimental module or experimental modules list. So this replaces our very dated Bartik theme when you install things on Drupal. So it's really cool to see a new, modern, clean front-end theme. I myself personally have poked around in there. And actually, you know, if you're interested in front-end design, they're doing some really interesting modern CSS approaches in there. So it's a really cool theme, both to, you know, from a look and feel, but also how they're organizing it, the structure behind it. So as a front-end person, I find this pretty darn exciting. Another note just came up on the on the organizers call right before this. We do have a DrupalTO YouTube channel, so the recordings of all the sessions are showed up in there. And of course, if you're interested in seeing a keynote from 2014, we have that in there as well. So just so you know, we've got a YouTube channel if you want to catch any of the recordings of these sessions. And so now I just want to call it out to the audience. If anyone has any job postings or announcements that they'd like to shout out to the group, please feel free to unmute or post those in chat, and we can take a look and we can read those out for you.
Yep, and therefore we're always looking for talent. So if you're looking to do Drupal stuff, do JavaScript front end stuff like a React and all that, please get in touch with us. And I don't know if it's official or anything, but I think we were looking for a PM. But get in touch with me, and then we can talk.
Okay. Anyone else?
Also here at Optasy, we are looking for both backend and front-end Drupal developers. And I added the the links to the jobs on the chat, I think.
Perfect. And so if anyone does have any job postings, also feel free to post them on the Drupal Toronto Slack channel. And we have a jobs channel, sorry, in our Slack there. So that's another good way to post anything if you want to get the word out. Is anyone else before we move on?
Possibly might be on the lookout for some developers in the next couple months or two, but if that is confirmed, I'll put it in the Slack, the appropriate Slack channel.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. So let's move on to the icebreaker session. So what's going to happen is Zoom has breakout rooms. And so just in a minute, what we're going to do is a box will open up and says join breakout room. Go ahead and press yes on that. And what we're going to do is go into groups of 4 or maybe 5 people. And we just take turns introducing ourselves. And if you can not leave the room early, that would be great. And also just to note, while we're recording the session, whatever goes on in the Zoom room is not recorded. That's sort of separate. And so when you get in, tell us your name, your company or project that you're working for. And our icebreaker question is, if you had a magic wand that could fix one thing in Drupal, what would it be? And so I'll give you guys an example. So my name's Aidan Foster. I'm owner of Foster Interactive, a web development shop focused on UX design, higher ed and B2B websites in Drupal. And if I could fix one thing in Drupal with a magic wand, I would like to have a magic information panel so that when I'm theming, I could easily access any of the Drupal data, that's the spaghetti of data that's hidden in behind the scenes in that structure. So some way to really easily navigate and drill down through things that are better than Kint. And I'd also like that magic tool to also show where that data has been altered. So if you want to find a variable and see if there's a pre-process that messes with it or so on, I would love to know and have a tool like that. All right, thank you. Victoria, could you activate the rooms, and then we'll go into our respective rooms. As you're going along, please go ahead and just put them into the chat window. And then at the end, we can read out those questions on your behalf. And if you have any clarifications, you can hop off of mute as well. So the main session will be designed for Drupal workflow and implementation strategies with Anna. And I'm going to pass it over to you now. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Just give me a second to start sharing the screen. And I will highlight the run button. You're able to see my screen?
Looks great.
Yes, looks great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm very, very excited to be here. And I did attend a couple DrupalTO meetings, not too many recently. And I'm very, very pumped to present here today. And this is the first meeting of the year. So really appreciate the invitation. Today, we will be covering design for Drupal workflow and implementation strategies, mostly on how you can set up a workflow for your team, for your multifaceted, multi-talented team, to have a smooth workflow between the designs and the concepts into implementation, and strategies to make some lives easier, especially for front-end developers. All right, so a little bit about myself. A lot of people here know me, and those who don't, I'm a senior architect currently at Kalamuna, and I'm Acquia certified Drupal 7 and 8 Grandmaster. I love nature and everything that is related to nature. I go take pictures of flowers, so find me on Instagram and see them if you're interested. And I'm a dog lover, and a dirty secret about it, or a funny secret about it, that my dog is named Simba, which is my dog is named after a cat. That's an irony of it. So you can feel free to post in the chat if you're a dog person or cat person, and we can have a little fight over there while I'm presenting. All right, so let's jump into the presentation. What we will cover today. First of all, we'll cover the motivation. You probably work at an established team structure and companies, and everything just works, or you get used to it, and that is how it is, and you don't really have to change anything. So what's the motivation to alter or update your workflow for collaboration between teams and for design to Drupal implementation? Then we will talk about the workflow itself, the new workflow that we are currently trying to adopt that will help out to improve some communication and collaboration on the teams. We'll talk about possible options for component-based design in Drupal right now. But mostly we are not going to talk about, this basic stuff of like, you can do it with paragraphs, and this is what paragraphs are, because there are tons of presentations on that. And we will be mostly talking about strategies of whatever option you choose, what strategies to adopt to make the life easier for everybody and don't bring overhead to your Drupal theme or to your development cycle. So that's what we'll focus on today. And that kind of naturally segues into site building techniques for successful theming. So how you ensure that as a backend developer, as a mid-end developer, site builder, you're building in a way so that your front-end lead doesn't hate you and they actually are happy with you and happy with what you're doing. So that's what we will be focusing on. All right, and the first topic is motivation. And as I said, you probably already have a workflow that you're happy about and you work with your team. We do too. We have a great communication workflow at Kalamuna, but we adopting a thought that, or like a view that we can always push something a step further, we can always evolve. And we want to make sure that we establish a communication flow that is separate than just like, ad hoc Slack or thousands of emails or, passing multiple files in Google Drive. It just with all the competing priorities, it's just nice to have certain things in one place and you know exactly where to find them and how to communicate with the design team, especially if you have multi-faceted teams. You have like design teams, you have technical teams, you have project managers, and that all just needs a little bit of a finesse so that you dance nicely together. We wanted to establish ease of alignment. That means that you want to be at the same page with your designers all the time. And I'll give you the examples of little things that you seem like, oh, that's not a big deal. They can drive into run implementations and then, rework later on. And we wanted to open the collaborations for everyone. So with Kalamuna, we value everybody's opinions, regardless of their specialties. So developers can bring, options about design things and implementation. Designers definitely are involved in implementation process, project managers and clients. So we wanted to open collaboration for everybody, open the flow for ideas and ease to segue comments and revisions. So that was our motivation. And that's where we jumped into tools and workflows and started our research. So we settled on a set of tools. Those are not like you have to do that. They're interchangeable. I'll just talking through what it brings us in terms of benefits, and then you can, switch to whatever works for you. We started with Figma. It definitely can be switched to Sketch or if you'd like, but we liked Figma for various of reasons, which I'll cover in a second. And then Figma connects nicely to Zeppelin. And then from Zeppelin, we export to Drupal themes, and some projects, particularly more bigger ones, also utilize some sort of a style guide. So it is inline and Drupal style guide. It's color static, which is our own developed style guides. Sometimes we use Mannequin, which is developed by Last Call Media, or we use Emulsify with a storybook. Depending on the project, we can choose one or another. I'll talk about them in a second. All right, so starting with Figma, I think a lot of people here may have known Figma for a while, seen it. That's actually a tool that was used for Olivera development, and it's used throughout the community very widely. If you haven't checked the Figma, I recommend you to check it out. It's an online tool, which is its biggest advantage. And one of the greatest things about it is that you don't have to install anything. You can just log in and you have all of the designs and all of the projects shared with you for your team, and the team can collaborate, communicate, comment there, and the clients can also view it with a different set of permissions. So there is no more, we have export something for the client or like send them a JPEG or a PDF. Now we can actually share Figma artifacts with them, which is great. And great permissions and collections of plugins. So our design workflow starts with Figma. And it was great already. It was a huge improvement in communications with common features in Figma Export CSS. So it was good for developers and good for designers. Quickly, we realized that specifically when we build in, prototypes of wireframes, we reuse a lot of things. Because if you think of it as a structural element of your page or an architectural element of your page, navigation is navigation. A card or a tout is a card or a tout, and it's going to be a card or a tout on every single project where you use it. And it's not so different. The difference comes in when you do visual design. So a tout can look 1,000 different ways. It can have animations, it can have nice effects and awesome modern CSS. But underlying structure, the information architecture of a tout will be probably the same. It's an image and a text. So we decided that we don't really want to, reinvent the wheel. And another great example would be if we think about certain components. Again, I'm talking about the tout example. You as a developer might think, oh, well, that's an image and a text on top. An image is a background image and a text is just on top of text. A designer might think it's an image element and a text is just positioned on top of it. And that is very small difference. But then when you think about it, when it goes into visual design and you start thinking about all the responsive breakpoints and everything else, that's very important because obviously an image object will behave differently than a background image. And when you build in the tout for that, like, do you need an image style? Do you need a responsive images module? How do you make sure that the design kind of translates into your Drupal architecture? And if you have this discussed prior with a designer or established with designers, then you're on the same page and you can start building away while the visual design is in progress. So you work efficiently in parallel, in sync, and you know that there will be minimal rework because you actually talked about it. So that's what we did. We started looking into plugins that could export things out of Figma into code. And basically what we've done here, we landed on Zeppelin. There are a bunch of plugins that Figma allows to export HTML, but as any agency, we are very opinionated in terms of what markup we want, specifically because we are very big on accessibility. So if we fixed a template once for accessibility issues, we definitely don't want to keep fixing it over and over and over again. So we wanted some sort of customizable solution to be able to target towards our needs. Another thing is Zeppelin provided CSS out of the box, and we were not big fans of it either. So we looked deeper into Zeppelin and we figured it out that it's very extendable. So you can build your own extensions for it, and it's very easy to do. And that's why we chose it. What Zeppelin allows you to do out of Figma and actually out of Sketch is one-click export of components. And what another great thing about it is that you can export from multiple projects on your Figma, on your Sketch, into one style guide or component library into Zeppelin. So that means that if you have a very successful component you never used before on one of the projects, then you can export it into Zeppelin, and the next project you can reuse it and not reinvent the wheel, and actually build on top of success of your project, which is great. And you're not limited to one project, so that you don't have to create like one Figma project translates to Zeppelin. Zeppelin acts as a hub to store all of your components and all of your pieces and kind of sync them together. Another great thing is if something is updated on Figma, it actually syncs out into Zeppelin, and it notifies developers that something updated by designer, and developers can adapt this way. So that's what Zeppelin was doing for us. But as I said, the HTML plugin was very rudimentary, not what we wanted, and ideally we wanted Twig. So we started building our own component library, so started slowly exporting out different components out of Figma. And another great thing about it is that in Figma you can have variants of one component. So you can see like in here in the logo, we have a variant with a tagline, we have just a gem, and we have just a word mark. You have different touts as well as a variant, and you can group them by the variant, and Zeppelin recognizes this. Zeppelin also recognizes a component in a wireframe. So if a designer exports out a wireframe, clicking in the different parts of wireframe, it will tell you which component it is, which is really great. But we were facing this challenge of markups that we wanted. So I did a little bit of a research, and I researched that we can make our custom extension. And Zeppelin has a fantastic extension API. It's based on the Node and NPM. They created an extension building tool called Zem. And you just run the commands and it generates a template of extension. Essentially, what Zeppelin does for you when it is an extension, it kind of just analyzes the content of a particular layer or component or property, and then outputs certain markup on the screen. So that was very easy to implement. I coded based on the layers, naming conventions, certain tweak templates. And because we already had successful implementations for a lot of those components on the projects, we knew good markup and we knew what we will need, what would work in Drupal. So we just were able to copy paste it in there. The advantage of that versus having it like, you know, somewhere like in a storage of a base theme is that you don't want all components all the time. So a first approach was like, okay, well, why don't we just store it in the base theme? But later on, you understand you have this tons of components sitting in your .tweak files or tweak HTML files, never used. They're just there. They have a cluttered CSS floating around too, just in case you will need that slider that you may not even need at the end of the day. So this is a cleaner way of doing it. When designer is building a wireframe, they can sit next to the developer, look through the entire component library, and pick which ones they're planning to use for the wireframe, so that when developer comes to Zeppelin, they can click on exact particular component and get the markup and copy it. Now, it is up to the architect or technical lead to decide where to use this markup. And you're not limited at all about it. So if you're using Pattern Lab, you can use the components module, and you can use tweak namespace and put it in the .tweak partial. You can always just put it in an override of a template of your entity. Is it a block entity, brick entity, paragraph, or content entity? Doesn't matter. This is basically entity agnostic. The only thing that you will see is like it uses node and fields values. If, for example, you decide not to use node, you will have to remap your variables. But having these fields in there, it actually enforces good markup and good site build practice as well, because you have descriptive, nice field names, you have descriptive, nice properties, and everything else. You ensure that the fields are built out in the right way. And another great thing about it is I'm sure that you guys can answer in chat that at least once in your lifetime, you knew that you built something like this date sample, and instead of building it from scratch, you knew that you did it on one of the client's projects. So you just spent another 20 minutes instead of writing it from scratch to dig it up. And you dug it up, you copy paste it, you're so happy it works, and you forgot to remove the comment where it says for client XYZ for that feature, and it's just there, and then you committed it into another client's code. It's not a big deal, but it would be nice to avoid it. So because we have this clean markup that doesn't really have a client's association with it, that means that every developer doesn't have to dig through the projects, and they can just select the component and get the markup. Especially, for things like these dates, it looks simple. I saw it on thousands of websites, similar format, and you start thinking about it. How do I do it? And you need to remember how. Now you don't. You just have this solution right for you, and it just walks you through it. You can also have the comments out of it. So I'm showing markup, but we also have extension that shows comments on like suggested implementation and best practices. And we have a CSS extension as well, but that's mostly related to visual components. So you can enforce best accessibility practices and implementation practices through that, and they're all in the one place. So developers, they look at this markup, they know exactly what's needed to be implemented, but also designers looking at it know, oh, that's an image tag and not a background image, or vice versa, right? So when they design for responsive, they already anticipate how the image will be scaling, how text will be floating, everything like that. And those little details, they just save time. All right, so that's what was it. After you've done it, after you copied your HTML or Twig and CSS, you can actually create components. So one of the great things that Zeppelin does is connection to the story book style guide that is on my right in here. Storybook is a fantastic style guide generator based on React, and it works really well with Emulsify theme that is available on Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 now too. Easy to install, easy to generate. It's a starter kit. It's not a base theme, so it doesn't mean that you will have to, maintain Emulsify going forward. You just start it as a starting point, and then you build your own theme out of it. And what is great about it is that you don't have to build an extension. If you feel like it's over your head, you can actually connect to Storybook and store your templates and CSS in Storybook. Another great thing that Storybook does for you is runs accessibility testing right on every single component. So that's another great feature. So you ensure that all your components are immediately accessible. If you decide that you want to go with your Twig snippets, you can have a component style guide within Drupal. And an advantage of that is that you actually build in an examples of every single component using for clients and editors on the site. So let's say you have nodes that are built out of components. You can place all of the components like you see on my left. We have a style guide for cards for the project, and editors can go and reference them. So if they are confused of how to place components and what they're supposed to be used for, or what options are available for them, they can actually go into this specific style guide pages, and depending on the amount of components on your site, that could be a page per component. So like here is just cards, or if you don't have a lot of them, you can put all of the components in one page. And editors have examples of how to use them, but you also can utilize Drupal permissions for those so that nobody else other than editors can see them. Another great thing about it, either for Storybook or Mannequin, or for inline style guide, is that you don't have to run this, visual regression testing. I'm not sure if it's false positive or true positive. The truth about it is that those style guide pages, in terms of content, they almost never change. If they do, it's you added a new component. So that means that you can attach your visual regression testing on CI, like Circle CI provides a very good integration with certain options, but you can also use something like Ghost Inspector or anything else basically you want. And those pages can be fed into that and run immediate visual regression testing on your deployment. And you know exactly that it's not going to fail. Another thing that you can attach is Xlinter, again, on deployment, and that will also tell you if you are immediately committing something that is not accessible. So great thing, you don't have to worry about it that much, and it just does it for you. And because the markup is static, it tests essentially the entire theme because it has all of the components generated in this way. But it's not a lot of effort to maintain, because if you point it to like front page or other pages on the site, editors change them all the time, and there will be a lot of false positives because it wouldn't expect the result wouldn't be as expected. So now on this one, so the result is more stable, and you can immediately nail down if something is broken. So that's in terms of a style guide. And as I mentioned, I'm showing inline and Storybook. Mannequin has exactly the same idea behind it. One thing I like about it is that it doesn't require you to create a different template. So for Storybook, you'll have to create stories, and it's a little bit an overhead, especially if not all of the team members are familiar with React, feel very, competent with React. Depending on your project structure, might be not the best idea. In Drupal is one if you have a very low budget clients that don't have a budget for you to spin off the full style guide. That's a great option to still give them some ability to reference their component, but not go over the board with it. Mannequin allows you to just comment and tweak, and it builds it out of comments of the templates in your template folder. So you don't have to go through the tweak partials, you don't have to do tweak namespaces, you can just do it right in your theme, which is fantastic, and it's a great approach. The downside of Mannequin is at the moment I checked, it didn't work with Drupal 9 yet, but they were going to build it. So I'm not sure if it's still working there or not. The last one is color static. We use it a lot as well, kind of interchangeable with Storybook. It's a Node.js style guide, but the idea behind it exactly a Storybook. Instead of writing React, you are doing Node.js, and that's it. So now when we have everything prepped, we have our wireframes and we have our components, we will jump into implementation in Drupal. So for Drupal, we have multiple options, and they all should be familiar to most of you guys here. It's paragraphs, bricks, layout builder, and Gutenberg. I wouldn't call Gutenberg a true component-based, design. And I played with it. It kind of it excites me, but the architecture behind this theme, the page when you look into the database, that makes me upset. So not good for migration. If you ever planning to maintain the site over the years, I wouldn't use it. But for small microsites, is a great option, totally stable in Drupal now. And if you want to play with it and never played with it, I encourage you to take a look. Paragraphs, bricks, and layout builder, kind of identical options. And the reason why you will choose one over another would be the requirements. So they all provide similar ideas. So which layout builder just kind of allowing you a little bit of a visual representation of your page and drag and drop on blocks. Bricks kind of does the same thing without as much visual inside the editorial form of your node or entity. And advantage of bricks over the layout builder is that layout builder is one-dimensional. Basically, it's flat. You cannot nest it unless there is entity references within your blocks. Bricks are actually multi-dimensional, so you can nest components within other components, which is great if you have complicated architectures. Something like you have a slider and you would like to put cards in slider, but maybe not only cards. You would like to put also videos, and maybe you would like to put some freeform text and tables in there, and all of it should be within the slider. That would be a great break for the bricks, because it would allow you to have a slider component as a brick and then nest things within it. And paragraphs are a very similar thing. The downside of paragraphs is their revisions, as far as they're actually killing themselves. And there are a couple open issues in the community that people still looking into in terms of orphan revisioning on paragraphs and multilingual support for paragraphs. It is multilingual, but the management of translations is remain to be seen, especially for the revisions and everything else. So when you decide on which one of the options to use, you need to ask yourself a couple questions. So first is, does your site need revisions? And I'm not asking you to turn off revisioning entirely in Drupal, but think about how, in-depth revisions should be, how complicated the workflow should be. Content moderation isn't core, that's fantastic. Let's face it, it's not as great, especially when clients come in and start thinking of Drupal as a great team workflow platform, and it's not. It's not built for that. It's not built for you to have 50 workflow states, and different roles have access just to these states. On top of it, it's also component based, and every component has its own state. And then you start looking into revisions. You say, okay, enable revisioning, and then suddenly your clients wants to also reuse these components throughout multiple instances in the site and throughout multiple pages, so that you have to now think, okay, well, which revision do I attach to node A, which revision do I attach to node B, and it just quickly transforms into a mess. So to avoid a mess, you need to define what revision schema is going to be used. You need to have a conversation with your client in terms of how revisions works on Drupal. That Drupal is very flexible and it is very interchangeable in terms of what is rendered where. And because of that, all of the revisioning and permissions are very fragmented. That gives you a huge flexibility and a huge downfall too, because when client looks at the page, they think that this page controls everything, and that's not always the case. Media entity are now publishable, and they also can have a moderation state. So people may not see the media if the media wasn't published, but they see the page because the page is published. Things like that. So talk about it with the client, and if you need a very robust revision system, probably, and you have a lot of content updates on the site and your site is huge, probably don't use paragraphs because there is like a death by revision situation that we don't account for when we build in the site just because it's not reproducible. But the more saves you have on your node, the more paragraphs you add on your node, the more complicated layouts you build, the bigger is the amount of revisions. And if you look into the Drupal backend and check for the tables, every single field has a revision. What that means is that it creates a join query for every single time when it tries to render you something out. And with content moderation, it forces revision for every single save. Even if you don't want a revision, it will still enforce it for you. So what happens on big sites with the rapid changes of data, so the sites that have nightly imports or things like, daily migration, things like that, you will run into this slow query, but it's not intuitive because it's not your query, it's a Drupal core query. You cannot really fix it because this is how core works. And then you start thinking about like, how do I get rid of them? And then you look into the UI, and the UI is remain to be seen because you can't really bulk delete all the revisions. You can't really manage revisions effectively, especially for paragraphs. You delete the node and orphan revisions are still cluttering your database, and that's not very intuitive. And then you create a view, and suddenly those orphan revisions are popping up into your view, and you don't know how to get rid of those. So you'll have to write some, custom scripts to clean things up for you. So in order to not shoot yourself in the back, don't choose component-based design if you're planning to use extreme moderation workflow with paragraphs. Simplify it and use it more like entity reference and moderate the page container versus a component. And it's very easy to do. You can duplicate any brick, for example, and instead of creating a version, you create a clone. And then if you don't need all clones, you can just delete on cron delete unused clones. And that's way more efficient structure than what you would get with paragraphs. Another option is not a lot of people know, but bricks at the end of the day, they're just providing you a fancy entity reference and not really enforcing you to use custom entities or ACK kit. You can attach any entity to be used within a brick. So you can actually use content types as components and rabbit hole them and take advantage of revisioning of multilingual that core already greatly supports, and then pair it with bricks and nest them out. And that's great because you can create layouts and you still utilizing fantastic revisioning and more like, established core support for multilingual for the content versus, a custom entity. And then, we plan for content moderation. Again, if you're using content moderation, that's great for bricks with content as components. You can still use moderation for every single brick if you use content type for the component. And think about if you need a full layout or a content layout. So if you need a full page layout, then bricks is definitely not your option. There are a couple modules in layout builder space that allows you to lay out all of the other areas other than the content of the node. And there is also nobody remove the ability to place blocks. So now with all of this excitement about the components and how to attach them to the node, people start to forget that you can actually place blocks still through the block library and theme regions. And with all of the blocks having different types and publishing and published states and revisioning, you can actually utilize them effectively as components as well and reuse them. So maybe on some smaller budget sites where editors don't need that much flexibility, this is a great option and still provides them enough flexibility to build interesting experiences. So once you choose one of the options, we will be focusing on bricks, not because it's better or worse, just because we need to focus on one option. You need to think about variants. I do recommend to stop thinking of components as a fieldable entity and think of it as actual entity as a variant. The reason why it is more beneficial to think of variants than to think of it as a fieldable entity is because it's easier to see an atomic object than a separate field. Because every single view mode or every single entity will have a slightly different markup, especially if you have it on a page and then you put it in a view and started putting fields there and decided to override some markup and other things. So the problem with that is people, actually your themers, they will have to do things twice, maybe 3 times, 5 times if you have multiple views, and every single time a site builder decided to add additional class with different markups, strip tags, things like that. So it's not reusable, it's not effective. If you do it in a layout builder and you use fields inside the layout builder, it's a nightmare. A themer cannot predict how it will show up. They will not be able to predict where it will appear, what will be the wrapper. And it just becomes this agony of trying to sim it up while actually chasing every single possible variant that an editor can put in. So to avoid it all, I recommend to use view modes. And it doesn't matter what type of component you decide to use, what type of an entity. View modes are pretty much supported for everything in Drupal. And in Drupal 8 and 9, it's very easy to create it. Just you press a button and you got a new view mode. And what happens there is that view mode is predictable. So when you create a view, instead of putting fields in, render entity in a particular view mode. When you put an entity or a block into layout builder, render it in a particular view mode. When you use it as a brick, again, render in a view mode. So each variant, so in here, for example, I have a date variant, will be a different view mode. I will have a date simple view mode and date text view mode. And then here for the touts, I will have like this one with the category, the tout with just text, the tout with text without image, and just an image. And that will be a view mode. The view mode will translate into the template. And out of this template, this is where you will be able to paste these partials that you have out of Zeppelin or your other style guide system. And it's predictable and it translates throughout the site. It doesn't really matter where I decide to use this date block. It always will be the same. The only difference might be like, well, it's narrower than I expected, but that's the only thing to fix. It's not going to change underlying and site markup or classes, so it's predictable for my themer. And no matter where I place it, it probably looks already good or 80% good, and there is less work. So, and another thing that allows to make it more flexible for the client is that when they build the page and they don't like, let's say, this tout with the categories and go, this content doesn't really fit it, they can quickly switch the view mode to a different one while they're building the page and see what works for them and create visually different experiences without calling a developer and saying, hey, you know what, I really don't want category on this page. So steps you need to take is define your entity types, define your view mode, and then override templates. So overriding a template is a very key step because Drupal comes with a lot of wrappers, especially if you're using content types as components and they're not going to have their own pages. Get rid of all of this unneeded, authored by information, footers, and other things. Clean this up, streamline the templates, make them very lean and nice and component-like, but keep the markup semantic. And those overridden templates, they can actually accommodate the markup snippets out of your style guide. And then on top of it, you can go a step further and set control modifiers. So what control modifiers are, it's ability to add additional functionality or change the functionality based on certain values on the field. Now, since we have the components in Drupal, we don't only have to store content in it, we also can store control elements right next to that component. So one of the great examples would be a slider. How many times you evaluated an old website, let's say Drupal 6 website, and one of the complaints the client has is like, we have 5 types of carousels on here. And they're like, why? Well, you know, one stakeholder really wanted the arrows here, and another stakeholder really wanted dots. And then 5 other stakeholders really wanted 3 slides instead of 1 slide in a row. And we created 5 modules to build the carousel. But that shouldn't be the case. All the modern libraries allow certain options to be passed into the slider. So all you need to do is give editors an ability to choose those options while they're saving the slider node, the slider component. So that's what you do with control modifiers. And then you don't render that, but you read it out and you pass, in case of your JavaScript functionality, into Drupal settings. And you know, and then you just render it with the settings and you get a completely different slider, and editors don't have to call the developer out to get it. So your bricks can look something like that. When you build it out, as I said, you can nest. So in this example, you have like a layout of columns and the 2 cards. And this is the great thing that I really like about bricks is view modes. So you see that it shows me all the possible variants that the card can be displayed, and it's controlled per card. But another great thing about it is CSS classes. So this is invaluable if you're using something like a framework like Bootstrap or things like that, and your client is familiar with them. Sometimes on the bigger projects, we have a huge IT team on the client side that they know Bootstrap, they ask for Bootstrap, and that allows them to put this little, you know, M small and other classes that Bootstrap uses to tweak a little bit the look and feel. Another great example would be, let's say you have a list of cards and every card is broken down with a border, with a bottom gray border. And you were like, okay, well, I don't really want this bottom gray border on the last component. Fantastic, I'll just put last child. Except when you put it in columns and the columns it's side by side, so that second card is actually not really a last child. It is last child, but it's just showing there on the right without the border, and the one that is on the left, it's still with the border and looks kind of awkward. So putting a modifier of no border class will allow you to clean this up, and the editors have full control over it. So you can provide some sort of a manual for them onto what modifier classes are implemented, and they can, again, alter things out really easily for you and not call developer every time they need modification or they want some sort of a visual embellishment. And those are small modifications so that you don't really need a full view mode out of it because you don't change the structure, but you still get nice variety. Another great example is we have image right and image left view modes in here because we're changing certain things other than, you know, layout. But technically, you do have a class that just flips flex property, you know, the row reverse, and that will be your left and right without changing a markup or having a different template. So that's a fantastic option that I really like about bricks interface, but you can achieve it with anything else. Like you can add it into every paragraph, or you can use the block class module to allow for the classes on the block as well. So there are options for that.
Just a quick note on timing. We're coming in on timing.
Yeah, it's a couple slides and we are done actually, so perfect timing. So in terms of modifiers, just to show you an example, it's basically that. You have some control fields in here. So you have booleans to show errors, dots, numbers of slides, autoplays, and loops. And that translates into this. I passed it into the Drupal settings and I instantiate my slick slider in this case with these options. And every time I save the node and clear the cache, I get a different slider based on the settings that I pass. And the last trick that I want to show you is when you use a brick or any other entity, you actually don't have to multiply this. So for example, if you have a reusable header and footer on a collection of pages, let's say you have a search collection of pages and you have tabs to flip between users, pages, documents, and you have the same header and the same footer, but those are not the same as a header footer of your site. So those are like just header and footer for the search. So let's say in the header you have a search box with some explanation of how to use the search, and the footer would have something like, you can find what you're looking for, contact us at this email. You don't really need to create two components. You actually can create one component, call it a summary, and what you can do in your pre-process is switch view mode for this component. So you create two view modes, one is a header and one is a footer. And in the pre-process, you just load a component in a different view mode. So if you set it on the display, in the manage display, you're setting it as a header, then load it as a footer on your specific pre-process and put it into the variables, and then in the template, you can render it out. And that saves out the query space and it makes it really fast and performant. And then you cache it out and everything is great. And you see the example of this code in here. And don't forget to check the access. But other than that, it's a pretty solid and fast trick. And you don't have to do just one view mode. Technically, I can see multiple view modes helpers. And I usually put it in some sort of utility service. And just here for this example, I put it in a module. And that's all I wanted to talk to you about. Before we jump into the questions, let's see what happened here. Something. Let's see. Okay. Google decided to stop. Well, before we jump into the questions, I wanted to point out that Kalamuna is hiring. We are hiring front-end developer and a backend developer. So if you'd like to talk about it, please ping me either in Drupal Toronto's chat, Slack, or just here as well. You can always find me on Twitter or find more information on our site. And that's it. Please ask some questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was an amazing talk. I have lots of questions, but I know we're at time, and you had mentioned that you've got a hard end time. So I would like to just pull up the last slide here and ask everyone who's on the call if you could please fill out the survey at bit.ly.com/DTO-5. That is in all caps, please. We really value your feedback on this, and that was an amazing talk and really cool. And I have tons of questions, and I'm guessing other people might have follow-up questions as well. So if you have those questions, can you please go over to the Drupal Slack channel? If you're not already on it, there's the DrupalTO URL here that you can use to join. If you check it on meetup.com, it's over there as well. And post your questions in Slack. And Anna, thank you so much for your time today and your wonderful presentation. And so maybe, I know you've got something to go to. So over time, we could post our questions in there. And thank you again so much. And thank you everyone for attending.